start with this. Well, I'm sure that most of you have heard by now that it took 2 attempts for Gervonta Davis to make the contracted weight of 135 pounds. And it's, it's kind of bizarre because Gervonta Davis is moving up in weight. So one would assume that it would be a lot easier for him to make 135 without any hiccups, without any setbacks, as it were, because he's moving up from 130. You don't have to cut the extra 5 pounds, thus getting there should be relatively easy. Yet it did take Gervonta Davis 2 tries to do so, because on the first attempt, he came in a pound over. This minutia, these particulars, these details, only accent the residual bad habits and lack of professionalism that Gervonta Davis is associated with. That if the guy weren't, ballooning in weight between fights, making weight really wouldn't be an issue. It really wouldn't be such a big fucking deal.
It's another day at the office.
You were having trouble making 130, and we all know it. That was a weight that Gervonta was struggling to make. So you go up to 35 because in theory it's supposed to be easier, yet it seems like you're struggling to make that too. This is why, more or less, you can characterize it as a lack of discipline, a lack of professionalism. Gervonta Davis shows up late to the weigh-in, blows the weight on the first try, has to try to cut that last pound and a half or whatever it was, and he shouldn't have to do that because essentially you're moving up in weight. You don't have to cut the extra 5 pounds the way you did before, so getting there should have been relatively easy, but it's Gervonta Davis we're talking about, and I've long said that this kid is Adrian Broner 2.0, that's what he is, that's who he's been, hanging around, and that's whose habits he's picking up. So, it is what it is. And there's a lot of talk about this because of, how these kinds of situations do have bearing over a fighter's performance. That, when you see a guy doesn't quite make the weight on the first try, it does tend to show up in the ring. And I understand that. I get that. But you know what? They didn't pick Yuriorkis Gamboa, and rest assured, they picked him. They didn't pick Yuriorkis Gamboa for no reason. Even if Gervonta Davis goes in there tomorrow, he looks a little flat, whatever the case, I don't trust Yuriorkis Gamboa's punch resistance at this point anyway. So regardless of how Davis is holding up, maybe Yuriorkis can make it interesting for a little while, but the logical choice in this situation really is Gervonta Davis.
Yeah, it is. Mm-hmm.
And it's Gervonta Davis by way of knockout because, maybe Gamboa is a more consummate professional than Gervonta Davis is, but he's also pushing 40, okay? This guy's, 37, 38 years old, something like that. He's been through the ringer a couple of times. Terrence Crawford bounced him off the canvas. If you ask me, he lost that Jason Sosa fight. He's clearly not the fighter that he used to be. God bless him. If he can make Gervonta work for it tomorrow, by all means do so. But if you're a gambling man, if you're the gambling type, then you'll know that, Davis is pretty much a lock to win this thing, and he's a lock to win it by way of knockout. That's my prediction. Davis by way of knockout. I think the most interesting fight on the entire card really isn't the main event so much as the light heavyweight contest between Badou Jack and Jack-Pascal. Badou Jack is going to be making his first ring appearance since suffering that loss to Marcus Brown, that gruesome gash over his forehead that impaired his sight and impaired his ability to fight. And Jack-Pascal, he's coming off that big win over Marcus Brown. In truth, I don't think that Jack-Pascal found the fountain of youth in beating that guy. I don't. I think that that's just another case of a young fighter who was all in his prime, looked past the old guy, and the old guy ended up old guying him. That's what I think happened. I don't really feel like Jack-Pascal is a safe bet to win the fight. I don't. I think that there are going to be interesting moments because of Badou Jack's tendencies. You see, Badou Jack, he's a bit of a slow starter. It takes him a round or two to get in his groove, find a rhythm, and get comfortable in there. And while this is happening, I feel that these are the moments when Jack-Pascal is going to make things interesting because he's a very aggressive, physical fighter who wants to stay close to you and rough you up. So it's in these moments that I think that,
it's going to be a fight.
It's going to be a contest. It's going to be competitive. But as far as the boxing and boxing acumen, as far as that goes, I do think that Badou Jack is a better boxer in terms of technique than Jack-Pascal is. Rushing in like that, you're setting yourself up to get hit with something hard. And I think that at some point in the fight, that's going to happen for Badou Jack. He's going to start landing hard shots on Jack-Pascal, and that aggression of his will end up working against him once Badou Jack gets into a rhythm and finds his groove. It may take a round or two, 3 or 4, in all honesty, because that really is a tendency, that really is a constant with Badu Jack, you know. But I am picking Badu Jack to win the fight, and I'll say that, you know, it's possible he gets Jack-Pascal out of there, because I reiterate, I'm not convinced that Jack-Pascal has turned back the hands of time, turned back the hands on the clock. That's not what I think happened in the Marcus Brown fight. That's not why I think he's here. I think Marcus Brown looked past him and, you know,
paid for
Marcus Brown really doesn't take the best punch.
What they say.
I think that in this fight, you know, it's going to be a situation to where it's definitely competitive in spots, but the conservative prediction, let's say Badu Jack on points. I could see it happening that way, and that's what I'm going to go with. Badu Jack to win tomorrow night's fight.
Points decision.
By way of a points decision. Just back to Gervonta Davis and what news is circulating about him. You know, it's not just the weigh-in stuff. Ryan Garcia, Golden Boy's proverbial golden boy, you know, for the next generation of fighters, he says he wants Gervonta Davis in 2020. And that's in keeping with the theme of guys eyeing Gervonta Davis. Vasyl Lomachenko quite plainly says he still wants that guy. Ryan wants that guy. And you wonder, you know, why are people even looking at this kid?
Why?
Given what he did at 130, which wasn't a hell of a lot outside of beating Jose Pedraza.
Here, like 2 or 3 years ago.
I mean, both Ryan Garcia and Vasyl Lomachenko have sizable fights on the horizon. You know, Ryan Garcia is supposed to be stepping up in competition sometime next year against former WBA Ring Magazine champion Jorge Linares. That seems to be the plan for Ryan. For Vasyl Lomachenko, we all know what the plan is for him. He's supposed to be fighting Teofimo Lopez and trying to unify those belts. Yet these guys, they still got Gervonta Davis on the brain. And there's a misconception floating around about Gervonta Davis and why it is that these guys are still looking at him.
What do you mean?
I mean, he does have a name. I don't think we can deny that. He is one of the names, one of the who's who guys. He's not the biggest name at 130 or 135, but does have a name. And, you know, when I try to wrap my mind around why these guys that have better things to do against fighters that are actually willing, you know, why are they still bringing him up? It dawned on me that, you know, they're looking at this guy. It's because the sharks in the water, they smell blood. That's got to be it. I mean, they see the kind of guys that Gervonta Davis has been fighting, and they see how this guy balloons in weight between fights. They see that there are obvious discipline issues and maturation issues associated with this fighter that does have a name, does have some talent, but, you know, all things considered, what's he really been doing? You know, you're knocking off these guys, and they really ain't no competition, and this is what you've been doing for the past 2 years. To the other guys that are outside looking in, Gervonta Davis might look a lot like food. Oh yeah, he might look like food. You've been spending your time with Fonsecas and Munez's and Cuellars and Ruiz's. You're fighting a very past it Yuriorkis Gamboa. This is what you've been doing for 2 or a little over 2 years. These guys are looking at you coming into their weight class and they're telling themselves, this guy don't know what he's in for.
Nope.
Because he's been having it his way for the past 2 years. Anybody that goes in there and they got a pulse that can pose some resistance, they can drag this kid into deep waters because he's really not used to being there.
He's not.
He don't know how to swim in deep waters. Or at least, he hasn't had to. Not a very long time. When the last time you faced a credible opponent that can pose some resistance is 2 years ago or over 2 years ago, well, that's a hindrance to you, you understand. You don't grow as a fighter by constantly having things your way with these cookie-cutter opponents that are made to order for you and for what strengths you have. They're catering to you, but in that way, they're hampering your growth as a fighter. Because at this point, you really don't need to be brought along at this point.
Anymore.
Iron needs to be sharpening iron. And Gervonta Davis ain't faced a soul in the last 2 or 2.5 years that posed any kind of resistance. A guy like Vasyl Lomachenko, kid like Ryan Garcia, and their handlers, because they're in on it too, they know this. They know the business better than me or you. And they figure, you know,
Balloons in weight.
Gervonta Davis hasn't actually fought someone with a pulse in a very long time. You put him in there with somebody who's halfway good, and he may not walk out with his O intact. That might explain why these guys who have better things to do are still looking at him. They know that while he's a talented kid and he shows promise, he's got bad habits, he balloons in weight between fights, He's not quite living like a fighter. He's not mature enough to be a consummate professional. The last 2 or 2.5 years, he's been kicking tomato cans left and right. He hasn't fought someone who would really help him grow as a fighter in a very long time. The last time that happened, it really was the Pedraza fight. And I think we've all been riding that scooter long enough. That was a while ago, okay? This point in the junction, Gervonta Davis, he really hasn't fought anybody halfway good. And I think people in the know, they realize this, and they look at him as a guy with a name, yes, a guy with an O, but a guy that can be beaten. And they feel they know it, even if he doesn't, even if him and his team don't quite know it. That's why I think they're looking at him. Okay, that's what I think is going on. And this is why I think Gervonta Davis's handlers have always been so reluctant to put him in there with anybody that's halfway good the last 2 or 2.5 years, whether it's Tim Farmer or Lomachenko or just anybody that's halfway good and that was there at 130. You know, they really ignored the majority of the weight class.
At 130.
You know, after winning the IBF title. They really kind of did. You know, top 10, top 5 guys, they might as well have not existed to the money team. So if we're still seeing that Vasyl Lomachenko is calling out Gervonta Davis, and we're seeing that Ryan Garcia is also calling out Gervonta Davis, if we're seeing that they're still adamant that they want that fight, one reason it could be is because they look at Gervonta Davis as food. Protected, shrink-wrapped food, but food. Moving on. I'm sure most of you heard already that the Deontay Wilder versus Tyson Fury rematch has been finalized. It is going to be on February 22nd, as it has been previously reported. Steve Kim had this to say. He said, Wilder versus Fury 2 to be announced during the college football playoff games on Saturday. Wilder and Fury will be in attendance. Also, per Bob Arum, in terms of the undercard for Wilder vs. Fury 2, each side gets 1 fight on the main broadcast, then 6 more fights, 3 each, which will air on a Fox and ESPN platform that day leading into it. Bob Arum has also revealed that there will not be a press conference tour for the Deontay Wilder vs. Tyson Fury rematch. Instead, Wilder will be in Atlanta and Fury will be in Arizona for the college football playoff games tomorrow, at which they will promote the fight. And get this. The UK pay-per-view broadcaster for the Deontay Wilder vs. Tyson Fury rematch on February 22nd has reportedly not yet been decided. It's claimed Sky Sports and BT Sport are both chasing the rights, according to Mike Kopinger. Some very interesting particulars in association with this thing. The fact that they're not actually staging a press conference for it. They've chosen to simply promote it during a heavily watched broadcast. I mean, it does make sense. If you want the most people to know about the fight, well, that is one way to go about it. So, you know, it's not a bad idea. They've got from now, the end of December, till February 22nd to promote this thing, and I'm hoping that at some point between now and then, we do see these two guys occupy the same space, face to face, so that we can get that initial tension, that tense atmosphere that makes people want to see them fight, that makes people want to see them lock horns and settle the score. Because if we don't know nothing, we know that Tyson Fury can talk some serious shit. And I'm actually looking forward to that. I mean, they may not be holding an inaugural press conference to announce the fight, but I'm sure at some point they're going to have these two guys sit down with each other and shoot the shit. I mean, it's only right. When you've got one of the best pound-for-pound shit talkers
in boxing
involved in a situation, you gotta let the guy talk his shit. It can only help sell the fight.
It did the last time.
Yet another interesting tidbit in regards to this rematch is that the UK broadcaster has not yet been decided, at least according to Mike Kopinger. One would have thought that, it would have been BT Sport by default, who we all know Queensberry Promotions is in bed with. One would have thought that it would have been them, but I think that if the situation is a little different this time, it's because they want the fight to go to the highest bidder. And it's for this reason that Sky Sports is in the running. That if Sky wants to put up the most money to get the rights to this thing, by all means, feel free to do so. Because I've said it before, both Top Rank and the PBC need this fight to do well. Very well. They need it to generate a sizable amount of money. They want to maximize profits, and one way that they can do that is by allowing Sky Sports to bid on it, by allowing them to potentially buy the rights for the fight, because Sky's got deeper pockets than BT. Oh, sure. They could have just said, hey, we'll do it like we did it the last time. You know, this one will be on BT. They could have did that. But by allowing both Sky Sports and BT Sport to bid on the fight effectively goes to the highest bidder. The network that is willing to pay the most
Money
to get the rights for that fight. And in that way, you optimize profits. And they need to do that. Because I've been telling you.
all fucking year.
I've been telling you. The PBC's in the red right now. They spent a sizable amount of money on trying to make Deontay Wilder into something that he ain't, and they got to try to get some of that money back, okay? Because remember what the story was. It wasn't that long ago. Deontay Wilder was given a sizable amount of money to reject DAZN's offer. And as it stands, he hasn't generated that sizable amount of money with any fight that he's had so far. The Brazil fight, that wasn't no $20 million fight. And the Luis Ortiz fight, at best, if the fight generated, if it did in fact generate 275,000 pay-per-view buys, well, that's only $20 million right there. What about covering all the other costs? What about breaking even? What about the profit margin, if there even is a profit margin? You know, Dan Rafael himself said that they were expecting to take a loss with that pay-per-view, and in all likelihood, that's what they did. So they need this fight, to generate as much money as it possibly can, and that's why they're leaving it to go to the highest bidder. If BT wants to bid the most for it, so be it. If they don't, and they let Sky beat them to the punch, so be it. Because they just want those profits. They want to make sure that this fight does as well as it possibly can. Now, there is a difference between what we're hearing now and what we were hearing before. That on the undercard, it might have looked something like a top rank versus PBC kind of undercard, to where they'd have their guys fighting against each other, and that's not the case. Instead, they have divided up the fights on the main card and the undercard, and they're both getting an even amount of fights for their guys. An even amount of fights between them. And I think that, you know, billing it as a top rank versus PBC kind of card, you know, the main event and the undercard, I actually think that would have went a long way towards getting buys, because we all know the rivalry that the two outfits have with each other, and that is highly marketable. You know, you could have had something like, I don't know, a top-ranked guy in Miller versus a PBC guy in an F.A. Ajagba. You know, you could have had it like that, or you could have had it to where you got a top-ranked guy in Vesputin versus a PBC guy in Ugas, or somebody like that. And I think that actually would have helped to get even more buys for this thing. But as it stands, that's not the way they're going about it. That's not how it breaks down. It is what it is. So we'll just see what other news develops now that this cross-promotional, cross-network fight has been finalized.